think you have to start with the purpose for those two books. You know, everything happens in a context, and those statements that appear contradictory are in fact not when you just step back and ask, what are the purpose of those two books, of Romans and James? The book of Romans is about the gospel of God. Paul is laying out the gospel he preached. Here's how you come to know God. And he's very clear in that, in terms of chapter 3 of Romans, where he gets in verse 21 to, here's the message we're proclaiming. And it is a message that is, according to verse 24, it's because of, you're justified because of the gift of God's grace through faith. So the ultimate grounds of it, he goes on to say, is our redemption, the work Christ did on the cross. That's how we can become right with God. And it becomes ours by grace. It's extended to us by the grace of God alone, the gift of grace, according to verse 24. And that becomes ours through faith. That's the means by which we receive it. And so in Romans, we are justified by faith alone. That is the means by which we receive the gospel, by which we come to know God. That's part of the purpose of that letter. When you come to James, on the other hand, James is very clear that he is laying out a series of tests of living faith. Is your faith genuine? Is it real? And when you come to chapter 2, he's laying out specifically the way you can tell that your faith is genuine is if in fact it's accompanied by works. Works are not the means by which we come to know God. Paul's very clear about that in Romans. James is simply spelling out the ways we know if we have that kind of saving faith. In fact, I think it's interesting in James chapter 2, where James is specifically laying this truth out. He makes this really important statement in verse 18. He says, but someone may well say, undoubtedly he's quoting those who would take issue with him. This was a common sort of rhetorical practice. He says, you have faith and I have works. And so in other words, these can be differentiated. It's okay, you've got works and I've got faith and this other guy has faith and works. They're two separate things. But he goes on to say something really important. He says, show me your faith without the works, and I will show you my faith by my works. It's interesting, the key word there is show. I will show or display or demonstrate my faith by my works. He's clearly saying that in fact, works are the display of, the demonstration of genuine faith. That's the reason he's saying what he's saying. And he's obviously saying that faith and works are two different things. And that faith, he's not arguing that faith isn't how we come to know God. He's saying that faith that we claim is displayed or demonstrated by the works that we show. In other words, works are the fruit of, the display of the faith that we have. And when you think about it, this makes perfect sense, because no inward quality can be seen and manifested without works. If I tell you, look, I have courage, I'm a very courageous person, how do you know that I'm courageous? You don't know that I'm courageous until you see my works. Soldiers will tell you that all the soldiers will talk about their courage until they find themselves on the battlefield. It's by their actions on the battlefield that the reality of their courage is displayed and demonstrated. And that's true with any virtue. Love. How do I know if you tell me you love me? How do I know you love me? It's by your actions. It's by what you do. That's all James is saying, is the reality of your faith, this inward reality that you tell me you have. The only way I know if you have it is if you display it, if there are works that show its reality. And I think all of this is just further confirmed by the illustration that James uses. He talks about Abraham. So does Paul. But think about this. When Paul talks about how a person is justified, how they're made right with God, what does he use as his demonstration of that? He uses that episode from Abraham's life in Genesis 15, where he believed God and it was credited to him for righteousness. But when James wants to show us that in fact Abraham has already been justified and that his works demonstrated that justification, what episode does he cite? What comes much later in Genesis 22, when Abraham is called upon by God to demonstrate his faith by obeying what he thinks is going to be the death of his son. And so you have these two episodes in the life of Abraham separated by a number of years. One, in Genesis 15, quoted by Paul in Romans, shows that he was justified by faith alone. And the second shows the reality of that justification, that it actually had occurred, that he really was believing God by his willingness to sacrifice Isaac. So when you look at these two books, when you look at their purpose, when you look at even what's said, and when you look at the examples that they use, it couldn't be clearer that we're talking about apples and oranges. We're talking about how we're justified in the book of Romans, and we're talking about recognizing whether we truly have been justified based on our works in the book of James.